By the time the Vatican found me, I had already spent years chasing objects that should never have existed. But nothing prepared me for the day they asked me to hunt a saint. The first time I heard that sentence, I thought it was a joke. I was in a small coastal town called Vezzano, a place forgotten by the world and covered by an almost permanent fog. My work wasn't exactly legal, nor exactly illegal. I recovered relics. Some were fake. Others were far too ancient to have an explanation. For years, I collected stories about fragments of bone that cured diseases, medallions found in tombs that seemed to change temperature on their own, and manuscripts that disappeared from one place only to reappear somewhere else. Most were frauds. A small portion were not. It was because of that small portion that two men appeared at my hotel on a rainy morning. They wore dark suits, no religious uniforms, no symbols. But one look at them was enough to know they were not ordinary people. The older man placed a folder on the table. "Mr. Duran?" I nodded. "We need your help." "Who are you?" He stared at me for a few seconds. "Let's just say we represent the interests of the church." That was already strange. What came next was worse. Inside the folder were photographs, hundreds of them. Most showed crowds, people crying, people kneeling, people smiling. In every image, the same man appeared. Thin, short beard, serene face, dark eyes. He wore simple clothes and walked among the people as if he didn't notice the attention he received. "Who is he?" the man replied. "They call him Saint Malik." I flipped through a few more photos. "Never heard of him." "That's because he appeared only 8 months ago." I kept looking. There was something strange about his face. I couldn't identify what. But an unpleasant feeling began to emerge. Like seeing someone familiar without being able to remember where you know them from. "And why do you need me?" The younger man slid another photograph across the table. This time there were no crowds, no smiles, no miracles. It was an empty road, and something covered by a white sheet. My stomach tightened. What happened? They found a body. I turned over another photo. Another body, then another, all in different locations, all near towns where the so-called saint had appeared. "Are you saying he killed these people?" "We don't know. Then the police should investigate." The older man sighed. "The police did investigate. And? They found nothing." I closed the folder. "Then why me?" The answer took several seconds. "Because the miracles are real." I laughed. I couldn't help it. They didn't laugh. That was the moment I realized they were serious. The man opened a second folder. Inside were medical reports, hundreds of them, documented cases, blind people who regained their sight, terminal patients who simply got better, severe injuries disappearing without explanation. I read page after page. The more I read, the less I wanted to continue, because everything seemed legitimate. Everything. "This is impossible." We agree. "Then it's a fraud." We investigated that possibility too. I looked at them. "And what did you discover?" The man answered quietly. "We discovered that the miracles happen in front of thousands of witnesses." Rain tapped against the hotel window. For some reason, that sound started to bother me. Something was wrong. I didn't know what yet, but it was. "If he performs miracles, what exactly is the problem?" The younger man pushed over one last envelope. "Look." I opened it. Inside was only a photograph. A single image. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was looking at. It was a wall, covered in hand-drawn symbols, ancient symbols. Far too ancient. My heart began to race. I recognized some of them. Not because I was an expert, but because I had spent years listening to stories about vanished cults, forgotten civilizations, religions buried by history. Those signs did not belong to Christianity, not even remotely. I looked up. "Where did you find this?" "Near the last body." I kept staring at the photograph. A cold sensation ran down my spine. I had seen one of those symbols before, years earlier, carved into a stone found inside a sealed cave. a stone that disappeared a few days later and left 3 researchers terrified. One of them refused to speak about the subject for the rest of his life. Who is this man really? The church representative answered with something I never forgot. That is exactly what we want to find out. I accepted the job that very night. To this day, I wonder whether my life would have been different if I had refused. 2 days later, we traveled to the mountainous region of Aachen. That was where Saint Malak had last been seen. The journey took nearly 10 hours. During the trip, I tried to gather information. The problem was that every witness told a different story. Some said he healed children. Others claimed he spoke with the dead. Some swore they had seen water spring from rocks after his prayers. But one detail appeared in every account. Every single one. After he visited a town, someone died. Not always immediately. Not always in the same way. But it always happened. Like a shadow, following in his footsteps. We arrived in the village of Nareth shortly before sunset. It was small, isolated, surrounded by mountains covered in dark pines. The place felt trapped in another era. When I asked about Saint Malak, the villagers reacted in strange ways. Some made the sign of the cross, others looked away. One woman began to cry. An old man simply slammed the door in my face. That was when I found someone willing to talk. The owner of an inn, a man named Thomas. He seemed nervous from the very first moment. You came because of him, didn't you? Yes. Thomas looked out the window before answering. Then you're already too late. What do you mean? He hesitated. His hands trembled. Because he has already chosen someone from here. A heavy silence settled over the room. Chosen? Thomas nodded. It always happens. Explain. The man swallowed hard. First comes the miracle. Then someone disappears. The way he said it made my stomach sink. It didn't sound like superstition. It didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like fear. Real fear. That night I barely slept. I analyzed photographs and reports until after midnight. When I finally decided to rest, I heard something. A distant sound. Very distant. Like voices. I opened the window. Cold wind rushed into the room. The voices were still there. Low. Almost a collective whisper. I looked toward the mountains and saw points of light moving among the trees. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. They looked like lanterns or candles. For some reason, I felt I shouldn't be seeing that. But I kept watching. And then something happened that still gives me chills when I remember it. One of the lights stopped. Far away. On top of a hill. Even from that distance, I had the absurd feeling that someone was looking directly at me. Then the light vanished. And the voices stopped at the same time. As if someone had ended an invisible ceremony. The next morning I learned that a village girl had disappeared during the night. And that was the first time I seriously considered abandoning the investigation. Because for the first time, I began to believe that perhaps the problem wasn't a man pretending to be a saint. Perhaps the problem was something much older waiting behind him. I spent the entire morning helping search for the missing girl. Her name was Lena. She was 16 years old. According to her parents, she had gone to bed normally. Her mother swore she had heard footsteps during the night. Nothing unusual. Nothing that justified concern. But when morning came, the bed was empty. The window was open. And Lena was simply gone. The villagers searched trails, woods, and ravines. No sign. No clue. It was as if she had evaporated. The most disturbing detail emerged a few hours later. One of the neighbors claimed to have seen someone walking near the house shortly before dawn. A thin man, short beard, simple clothes, Saint Malak. When the news spread, the people's reaction surprised me. No one seemed furious. No one seemed outraged. Most simply lowered their heads, as if it were inevitable, as if they already knew it would happen. That afternoon, I decided to visit the place where the last body had been found. A local priest offered to accompany me. His name was Gabriel. Unlike the representatives who had recruited me, he looked exhausted. The deep, dark circles under his eyes and his worn face gave the impression of someone who hadn't slept in weeks. During the drive through the mountains, I tried to get information from him. What does the church really know about him? Gabriel took a while to answer. Less than it would like. Do you believe he's a saint? The priest stared at the road. I used to. The answer caught my attention. And now, he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Now I'm not sure what he is. We continued in silence. The forest seemed strangely quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind. It was an absence of sound that was beginning to feel unsettling. After nearly an hour, we arrived. A clearing surrounded by tall pines. The body had been removed days earlier. Even so, something felt wrong. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the place itself were waiting for something. I walked across the ground, examining everything around me. That was when I found marks in the soil. Circles, lines, drawings almost erased by the rain. I knelt to examine them more closely. My heart sped up. The symbols were similar to those in the photograph. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Who made these? Gabriel shook his head. No one knows. I continued analyzing them. There was a logic to the drawings, a pattern, something I had seen before in ancient manuscripts. They weren't prayers, nor blessings. They were invitations. The word appeared in my mind without any explanation. Invitations, like doors drawn for something to pass through. I stood up quickly. A bad feeling washed over me. The more I investigated, the more it seemed that Saint Malak wasn't producing miracles. It seemed he was preparing the ground for something. On the way back to the village, Gabriel finally decided to speak. Maybe because he was too tired to keep secrets. Maybe because he was frightened. There was another case before this one. Another body? No. Then what? The priest took a deep breath. An exorcism. I looked at him. And? It didn't work. That was unexpected. The person was possessed? It wasn't the person being exorcised. It took me a few seconds to understand. Are you saying they tried to perform an exorcism on him? Gabriel nodded. 3 months ago. Who tried? 4 priests. What happened? His silence answered before his words did. None of them talk about that night. That haunted me for the rest of the day. When darkness fell, I returned to my room at the inn. But I couldn't rest. Something kept pounding in my head. A simple question. If Saint Malak was a fraud, why was the Vatican so frightened? And if he wasn't a fraud, why was he leaving the dead in his wake? Shortly after midnight, I heard knocking at the door. I opened it. It was Thomas, the innkeeper. He looked pale, more than ever. You need to come with me. What happened? They found something. We walked through the empty village streets. Fog covered everything. The few lanterns barely illuminated the path. After a few minutes, we reached the local church. Dozens of villagers were gathered outside. No one spoke. No one moved. All of them stared in the same direction. I went inside and immediately noticed the smell. Burned candles, incense, moisture. But there was something else mixed in, something difficult to identify, something ancient. At the main altar stood Father Gabriel, frozen, staring at a wall. I approached, then I saw them, the symbols, hundreds of them, drawn during the night, from floor to ceiling, exactly like in the photograph. My entire body went cold. Because nobody had entered the church, the doors had remained locked, the windows closed, and yet the symbols were there, as if they had appeared on their own, or as if someone had passed through the walls. The villagers began to murmur. Gabriel made the sign of the cross. But I noticed something even stranger. At the center of the symbols was a phrase, written in a language I did not recognize. And yet, I could understand it. It made no sense. I had never seen those words. I had never studied that language, but the meaning appeared in my mind instantly, like a forgotten memory. The phrase said, "He is opening the way." A chill spread through my chest. A way to what? No one answered, because at that moment the church bells began to ring, on their own. The sound echoed through the entire village. The villagers panicked. Some ran, others dropped to their knees. And then something even worse happened. A woman began screaming outside. We rushed into the square. She was pointing toward the mountains. Everyone looked in the same direction. The lights had returned, far more numerous than before. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, moving slowly among the trees, forming an impossible line that wound across the dark slopes. They looked like people carrying candles, but they were too far away to identify. I watched for several seconds and realized something. The lights were not moving randomly. All of them converged toward a single point, the summit of the tallest mountain in the region, a mountain called Val, the same place where, according to reports, St. Malach had gone 3 days earlier. At that moment, I understood I could wait no longer. If I wanted answers, I had to find him. We left at dawn, me, Gabriel, and 3 men from the village. The climb lasted for hours. The farther we went, the stranger everything became. The trees looked distorted. The trunks grew at impossible angles. The roots emerged from the ground like twisted fingers. And there was a constant silence. No animal sounds, no bird song, nothing. As if the mountain itself were holding its breath. Early in the afternoon, we found the first evidence that we were on the right path. A small abandoned cabin. The door stood open. We entered. The interior was empty, except for one thing, an entire wall covered with portraits, hundreds of them, hand-drawn, all depicting the same person, St. Malach. But that wasn't what terrified me. What terrified me was realizing that the portraits grew older as they progressed across the wall. Some looked recent. Others were decades old, others centuries old. And in the farthest corner was a painting so worn it could barely be recognized. Yet it was still him. The same face, the same eyes, the same calm expression. My throat went dry. "This is impossible." Gabriel didn't answer, because at that moment we found something written behind one of the frames. A date. The year 1147. We stood frozen. No one had the courage to speak, because we were all thinking the same thing. If that painting was authentic, then St. Malach had not existed for only a few months. He had been walking the world for hundreds of years, and that revelation was only the beginning of the nightmare. No one spoke for several minutes. The village men avoided looking at the portraits. Gabriel looked as though he were about to be sick, and I kept staring at that date, 1147. Even if the painting was a copy of something older, it still didn't explain the main problem. The face. It was exactly the same. No differences. No signs of aging. No changes. As if the person portrayed had remained unchanged for centuries. We decided to continue. Mount Val grew steeper the farther we climbed. The sky darkened before the afternoon was even over. Heavy clouds covered the horizon. The air felt different, colder, denser. Breathing required effort. Soon afterward, we found another sign. A trail of stacked stones, hundreds of them, lined along the path. Each pile bore a carved symbol, the same symbols that appeared near the bodies, in the church, in the photographs, in the clearing. It was impossible to ignore the pattern. Everything pointed to the same place. Everything pointed to the summit. As the sun began to disappear, we heard voices, very distant. At first I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. They sounded like chants, hundreds of people reciting something in unison. The sound was so faint it could barely be understood, yet it produced a strange effect, a feeling of familiarity, as though some forgotten part of my mind recognized those words. The three villagers began to show signs of nervousness. One wanted to turn back. Another suggested waiting until dawn. But it was too late. We all already knew that. The mountain seemed to have drawn us there, like a trap that reveals its shape only after it closes. We continued, and then we arrived. The summit of Val was completely different from the rest of the mountain. There were no trees, no vegetation, only a vast expanse of exposed stone. At the center stood an ancient structure, circular, made of dark blocks, so worn by time that they seemed to belong to another era of humanity. None of us knew who had built it, but we all understood the same thing. That place was far older than any church, far older than any known kingdom. The voices came from inside. We approached slowly. The chanting grew louder. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my neck. I reached the entrance, looked inside, and saw hundreds of people, perhaps more, residents from many towns, men, women, the elderly, children, all kneeling, all facing the center of the structure, and at the center stood him, Saint Malak. For the first time, after weeks of chasing stories and traces, I finally saw him with my own eyes. He was exactly as he appeared in the photographs. Thin, short beard, simple clothes, calm expression. But there was something impossible to explain, an overwhelming sensation, as though his presence occupied more space than his body, as though something enormous were hidden behind that human appearance. He raised his eyes, and immediately found me in the crowd. He showed no surprise, no concern. It was as if he already knew I would arrive. Then he smiled. That smile frightened me more than anything else, because there was no malice in it, no cruelty, no madness. There was sadness, a deep sadness, ancient, unimaginably ancient. You finally arrived. His voice echoed through the hall. The hundreds of people remained motionless. No one reacted. No one seemed surprised. "Do you know who I am?" I asked. He nodded. "I know who you were." The answer struck me like a blow. What does that mean? It means this is not the first time we have met. My entire body tensed. I've never seen you before. Not in this life. The words made the room feel even colder. Gabriel stepped forward. "In the name of God, tell us what you are." For the first time, the smile disappeared. Saint Malak watched the priest for several seconds. "That is the exact question that started all of this. Answer me." I tried. The silence that followed seemed endless. Then he pointed to the floor. The stones began to vibrate. The chanting stopped. And something happened. Something I still cannot fully explain. The markings scattered throughout the place began to emit a soft light. The symbols, all of them, the same symbols found throughout the investigation. They were connected. They formed a single gigantic figure, a figure that could only be understood from above, a seal, a prison. At that moment, everything began to make sense. The bodies, the disappearances, the miracles, the symbols, everything. But the answer was worse than any theory I had imagined. "You're not trying to open a door." My voice came out almost as a whisper. Saint Malak nodded. "No, you're trying to keep it closed." His eyes showed something close to relief, as if someone had finally understood. Gabriel seemed unable to believe it. "What is imprisoned here?" For several seconds, no one answered. Then the ground trembled, just once, but it was enough. The kneeling people began to cry. Some prayed, others covered their faces. And I felt it. Something beneath us, far beneath us. Something alive, something conscious, something waiting. Saint Malak closed his eyes. Long ago, when empires still had no names, they found a presence that should not have existed. The entire hall seemed to listen. It was not a god. It was not a demon. It was not anything that could be understood through human words. Then what was it? He looked at me. Hunger. The answer sounded absurd, but the way he spoke, it destroyed any doubt. He was not talking about a creature. He was talking about a principle, a force, an eternal need, something that consumed everything it encountered. It tried to enter this world, and you imprisoned it. We tried. Saint Malak looked at the ground. Thousands died to build this prison, thousands more to keep it sealed. Then he pointed to the people around him. Each generation sends guardians. Each generation forgets why. And each generation risks freeing it again. At last, I understood the miracles. The bodies are the price. The sadness returned to his face. The seal demands balance. Every time it weakens, someone must be offered, not out of cruelty, but to prevent something worse. Gabriel stepped back in horror. That's monstrous. Yes, Saint Malak answered without hesitation. It is monstrous. Another tremor shook the structure. Stronger this time. Small cracks appeared in the floor. The people began to panic. Then I saw something emerge from those fissures. Not a creature. Not exactly. Shadows. Movements. Impossible forms that vanished whenever I tried to focus on them. My mind refused to comprehend them, and yet I felt absolute certainty. If that thing reached the surface, everything would end. Saint Malak walked to the center of the seal. It's happening again. What is? The prison is failing. The cracks widened. The chants turned into screams. Some tried to flee. Others dropped to their knees. Then Saint Malak looked at me one last time. Now you understand why they called me a saint? And why people die? No. He shook his head. I never killed them. The revelation hit me immediately. The missing, the dead, the chosen. None of them had been hunted. None of them had been pursued. They had offered themselves. The truth was as terrible as it was unexpected. The families never knew. The towns never knew. But those who understood what lay imprisoned beneath the mountain made an impossible choice. They gave their own lives to keep the world safe. Then Saint Malak raised his hands, and for the first time I saw fear on his face, not for himself, but for what lay below. The light of the symbols exploded. The entire ground shook. The shadows retreated. The screams ceased. And for a single second I felt something watching through the cracks. Something vast, ancient, hungry. Then everything vanished. I woke up hours later. The mountaintop was empty. The structure had collapsed. The people were gone. The symbols had disappeared, as if nothing had happened. We never found Saint Malak's body. We never found traces of the prison. We never found proof. When I reported everything to the Vatican, they listened in silence. No questions, no comments, as if they already knew. Months later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was only a photograph, a recent one, taken in another country, another city, another crowd. And at the center stood the same man, the same face, the same calm expression, not a single day older. On the back of the photograph was a single handwritten sentence. As long as I keep walking, it will continue sleeping. Many years have passed since then. I still work with relics. I still search for answers. But I never tried to find Saint Malak again, because some truths do not need to be investigated twice. And sometimes the only thing more terrifying than the monster imprisoned in the darkness is realizing that the man who keeps it chained is growing more and more tired.